Hello student. Today I am going to introduce to you about a course titled as Gendered Nation. This is part of the MA Masters in Women's and Gender Studies program, which is offered by School of Gender and Development Studies. In fact, this course, particularly the complete Masters in Women's and Genders, is revised recently, and the course codes in fact change it, and therefore the course code of this Gendered Nation course would be MWG 106. So let me begin with this course, that why do we need to study Gendered Nation? And in fact, if you look at the complete program, in the first year you have the PG diploma also and the lateral entry also in this particular program, and then in the second year you have 105, 106, 107, 108. So in the second year we do have the two specialization, in which that 106, 107 and 108 will be talking about in depth about literature culture specialization. The other specialization is women's studies, which is 109, 110 and 111, right? So in order to understand the Gendered Nation, which is completely based on the literature, let me begin by raising this question to all of you. What is the role of literature in our life? Can literature helps us to understand the formation of the nation? If we look at literature per se, literature helps us to understand the society. For instance, if we want to know about the 19th century India, we go back and look at the records, the archival records, the writing. At the same time, we also look at the literary material which was written during time. Either it might be novels, it might be poetry, it might be drama, all kinds of forms which was written. I mean, if we look at in fact the history of the countries per se, South Asia or in general globally, we do have the records that oral history was there, oral narratives used to be there, and the best example one would cite in the mythological works also, whether it's a part of religion. For instance, you would see Ramayana, Mahabharata. Whether you would see, if we want to know about Buddha's teaching, you go back and read the Pali text. It would tell us, for instance, the Sutta Pitaks, the Vinaya Pitak, which talks about how the monk should be. So these code of conducts are given about monk, and if we want to know about this, you would see the Tripitaka is one of the best, finest work. So there is an oral tradition. Eventually, people started writing. But if we really want to know about broadly literature, it gives us a kind of understanding how the society was. It was a mode of expression where one was, staying during that time, or one is accommodated. So it's human beings who are expressing the feelings. It might be in different forms. Today you see that there are writings by the Dalit scholars or the Dalit writers who are talking about their marginalization. So in this particular course that we are going to talk about how the formation of the nation state is happen from the gender perspective. So one of the question again further I would like to raise is this: do you think that literature constitute the character of the nation from the gender perspective? Does it revolve around the politics or the nation state and gender? And yes, literature does evolve and constitute the nation, but when we look at the whole history, there is somewhere the silence or the unheard voices. For instance, that I would cite one more example to explain to you, like the history of the partition. Many of us were not knowing till the scholars like Urvashi Butalia, Ritu Menon in fact brought out the books, right? And the contemporary scholar at that point of time, in fact, wrote those books, novels. When we understood that, we read and we understood that, okay, this is what the history of the nation state. But when we look at again from the gender perspective, it tells us that those unheard voices are there, which has been written, and specifically, these evidences and record tells us it can be, seen from the gender perspective, the issue and the, the kind of articulation the scholars have done eventually. So it tells us in fact about the what kind of politics was there, how the country was going through, or the making of the nation state and the gender. So in this context particularly, this course was designed and developed in order to make you understand the nuances, how we should look at literature. Now, for instance, if we look at block 1 of this particular course, which is dealing with nation and imagination, in the unit 1 is titled called Theorizing the Nation, we would, sort of engaging into this debate. What is the concepts? Like for instance, in the first year, when you have read this particular course, Gender and Power, you read about nation, nationalism, state. These are the few concepts. For instance, you have read about Benedict Anderson, right? How do we define those concepts and understand eventually in order to understand and evolve with this concept? So from the literary perspective here, you need to read the work of Raymond William, who talked about literature, right, broadly, and in which that how one is going to go and talk about the nation. How do we theorize? So this particularly, the first block is emphasizing on different theories of nation by different scholars. For instance, this concept in which you are going to go and understand the theoretical way, and you would see that how those theories of nationalism, how do we understand and define the nation, as well as the various other factors involved in this understanding and definition. So there cannot be a one sort of definition. We need to look into the the construction of the nation from a different perspective. The question of, say, for instance, the ethnicity, right? Nature versus culture, right? Language, race, gender. And you can in fact relate with this because we live in a diverse country like India, and in which that how the concept of nation can be seen from the northeastern perspective, right? So there is a literary tradition which we have a rich literary tradition which we have to look into, and these are the some issues of nationalism which you are going to sort of engage with it. At the same time that you have to also understand there is a boundaries or territoriality and the common heritage and are there in order to understand these debates. So you would understand the histories and the tradition. In addition to that, you would be also introduced to the feminist perspectives, or the sort of the insight or the vision which feminists have developed for nation and nationalism. I mean, on the other issues, the ways in which these debates evolve. For instance, masculinity or femininity, the ways in which it has deployed over a period of time in a due course of time when these debates have emerged. So it is important to remember the literary representation which is given and those theoretical understanding. I mean, I have mentioned few scholars to make you understand, but at the same time, when we look at the unit 2 of this block 1, Theorizing the Nation 2, you would also understand the ways in which the colonial period was shaping, and it was also evolving with the women's question, right? For instance, in this unit 2, you would understand that particularly the specific case of India in which the nationalism debate was evolved under the colonialism. Now, it was a very dynamic and complex process in which you would understand how the nationalism, the nation, which was again in a very patriarchal forms. For instance, if we look at the social reform movement, the ways in which it was shaping, it was raising the question of the education, and but at the same time that how women were involved. So you would also understand through the writings by the various scholars. For instance, in this theorizing nation unit 2, you would be introduced to the works of, for instance, Raja Ram Mohan Rai, then the Vidyasagar, then Tarabai Shinde, Pandita Ramabai, and there are many other scholars during that time who was talking and reflecting upon the several issues, how the making of the nation process was going on through several writings. And specifically, in order to understand this, we have used different sources of the different languages and tried to brought out the entire literature, which was written. It may be Bangla, like for instance, Ruqayya Begum's work, Rukhsana's Dream. So these kind of work which got published, translated from Bangla to English, or the Marathi or the Tamil sources, or different languages which was sort of translated, and tried to brought out, in fact, what does it mean theorizing the nation. One of the significant work which I want to introduce to you is also Mahashweta Devi's work. I mean, we all of us knows that one of the most path-breaking work she has done, and one would directly relate in order to understand theorizing the nation, because again, nation is the building process. And even today, if you relate those, because as I said to you earlier, that the ways in which that we look at literature, it also talks about the politics of the state. Now, recently we have seen few years before the debates on the NRC. So there are people who have written the academic work at the same time also from the literature. And there are few scholars which we must also, while reading, we updated in fact this in the revision, but also you should start sort of engage with those debates, like for instance the work of Minakanda Swami, which is one of the finest work which you can sort of relate in order to understand today's making of the nation process, also how the nation is going through, right, from also the feminist perspective. Now in the unit 3 of this particular course, Gender Nation, of block 1, we are talking about imaginating the nation. Now, in fact, there's so much of readings that we divided this thing into 1 and 2 parts, right? So, in this particular unit, you will read about the idea of nation as historically into being through the imagination of its constituents. For instance, the citizens, communities, both at the margin and the mainstream. So there are literary writings and which embodies those various imagination of the nation, right? So this particular unit will introduce to you the prose and genre, like for instance Faiz Ahmad's work, right? You would read and understand those poetry and Faiz's work. I mean, I don't have to spell out, but also Amruta Pritam's work. These are some of the unique work which is talking and dealing with, the modern nationalism, the ways in which they evolve over a period of time, what they have imagined about India's independence and how it would be over a period of time. So there are several texts in which one is going to go and understand. So for instance, as I mentioned to you, Tarabai Shinde, Pandita Ramabai, Savitribai Phule, and there are also others, particularly in the context that the work through drama and music, Like for instance, drama and music, these are again in a genre in which how over a period of time the idea of the nation building was evolved. Like for instance, the work by Lata Singh, in which that she's talking about the courtesans women, how they were part of that, but the courtesans women also, they used to write, and they also talking here about, so they, one would see that those short essays written by them, in which they are talking about India's independence and how they sort of imagine this debate, even from the gender perspective. So this is of course in relation to the nation. So this again, this particular unit is dealing with the engagement of the literary writings in India, and then building up the notion of the identity of the nation. So you're not going to only read this, but also the 19th 20th century and the present century, the latest work, how feminist thinking was going on, and the critique in the literature based on South Asian realities, and over a period of time how it has been practiced and developed in the India's independence struggle. So this unit will also offer the ways of imagining the literature, then creativity across the disciplines, writings, films, music, dance, theater, and particularly the women writers and the performers. As I mentioned to you, one of them courtesan. So in order to sort of illustrate the contemporary relevance of those debate about the idea of nation within the field of the artistic production and women's creative production. So unit 4 is in fact dealing with the imagining the nation, in which that one is going to go and sort of engage with the classical music and the theater, and how this tradition inform of theater and music over a period of time evolve, and then how those this debate on emancipatory processes and forms evolved in India's independence struggle to have a sort of imagination of the gender and the nation. So and I would just sort of ask you to engage with few of the readings, like for instance the fascinating work Women's Writing in India by K. Lalita and Suzy Thoreau. This is published by OUP in 2 volumes. In fact, it is talking from the 6th BC, that one, very, very old literary sources across the India is given, translated into English, which will make you understand the depth of this debate, right? So, again in this particular block, you are going to engage with the debate on imagining the nation in part 2, in which that what are those emancipatory forces behind the art forms. Now, for instance, today we are also talking about a few more things in theater and performance, and I would quote here the finest work by Prashant Ingole or Y.S. Alone, in order to make understand to you that how these debates are engaging into it. So and then in this block 2, you would be introduced to race and ethnicity, gender and class, caste, religion and language, gender and region, and you would see that how the question of race and ethnicity is evolved in the making of the nation state, gender and class, in which that the novels, particularly by Premchand, which will take you further and make you understand what is a correlation between the class and the gender. So if you know, many of you must be knowing the Hindi novels, but the whole debate is that the question of class, because here is the poverty and class which comes in, and how the woman is struggling into that, and where we have reached now, right? So the question of again the caste and nationalism, which is a key debate in this particular block 2, in that you're going to understand the writings done by the scholars and also by the people who are from particular caste location, especially the marginal community like Dalits and tribes, like Sikhe Januk's work or Bama's work, in which, and there are many others, in which you are going to, sort of engage with this debate that can it be a possibility. I would in fact ask you to read fascinating work by this G. Aloysius, in which Nation Without Nationalism, or sort of, the work of the Ambedkar, in which you can sort of engage with it and try to understand in a deeper manner that why is it that necessary to even think about from this point of view or perspective and build up the new, because we want an egalitarian society and we have to really work for that. So in also in this particular course, in this block 2, when you are looking at region and language, now language plays a significant role, right? And if you know particularly certain languages, it's an advantage. For instance, if I want to really do a theoretical sound work, I must know, if I'm drawing from the Western society, I must know the basics and thorough debate and thorough with the language of the French culture, French society, basically the French language. Or if I want to know anything about even an Indian language, I should know, because language plays a very significant role in the life of everyone when one is writing. Today we are in a modern society where you would see that literary translations is one of the very important phenomena which is going in the literary discourse. As a result, you will see that rare things which we were not knowing previously, today you can sort of exchange those ideas. So region and language, and there is a relation of the gender, because how a man write or how a woman write or how the LGBTQ community is writing, so there is a specific departure in order to understand the religion, region and language. And also in the gender and religion, you would understand that from the Western society, whether it's a Christianity or it's a Islam or it's a Hinduism or the Buddhism, how the woman evolved. Like for instance, to cite one example, is that the Therigathas. Now Therigathas is one of the very ancient texts where women bhikkhunis are talking about their emancipatory liberatory process, that how they become enlightened, right? Now through this, that you are going to understand these debates in a very, very thorough manner. Now block 3 is dealing with the masculinity, femininity and sexuality, female body and national body, and these are all only to not to make you to engage you, but for instance, that if you look at the first year courses like MWG 104, there is a racial body, there is a body which is a pregnant body. So women go through this, and there are different sort of bodies, right, in which that the shifts have happened. Like for instance, how do we look at those bodies? So before that, one has to also understand the debate of masculinity and femininity, because if you even look at that how patriarchy was operating in the society, these two debates, in fact, on masculinity and femininity, you can easily relate in order to understand the class, caste, region, ethnicity debate. And further, you would see that in the femininity also, that how the feminine point of view, the deployment, the reproduction of the feminities in the discourse of nationalism was occurring. And then also you have to today understand, because today we are talking about the LGBTQ plus asexual community or the groups, and we are recently the government of India also put on the portal about this, that we have to give the suggestion. So you're free to give a suggestion as a student while reading. You might have the different questions, but for the policy making, you can always sort of engage with this debate and thoroughly understand and accept, because we know that how the 377 repealing had happened, through the Supreme Court. But even though how those sexualities are still there, those binaries of sex and gender over a period of time have changed. If we look at the work, the very basic books and the work which sociologists and anthropologists, talked about over a period of time, but, eventually when we see that there's a debate, many scholars have worked on it, and particularly the vantage point here is that how the psychoanalytical framework, which over a period of time, from Freud to Lacan or Michel Foucault's work, and how the feminists have over a period of time criticized those debates. So then sexualities comes in as a very significant work than the female body and this thing. So in order to then understand, the block 4 is dealing with violence, marginalization, militarization, and in this that you would understand that, for instance, when we talk about the violence, you have to understand the category of the state. Now, in the category of the state, you need to also understand how this debate moves on. Like, for instance, the partition, I gave the example, those narratives. Now, Restoration Act, right? How those debates have emerged, and then how feminists have done the intervention, because every time it's a woman who sort of engages with it in order to make the peace in the community or in the society. So, and here is that we had gone a little ahead in this particular chapter to make you understand the case studies of Burma, Myanmar, and other places. In the marginalization and the other militarization, you have also understood with this debate that how during the time of the militarization, marginalization, these chapters focuses on that what would be the gender position and how it has helped making the nation building. Again, I'm emphasizing this from the gender perspective. And also in the final block, which is dealing with, transnational gender identities, which is again been very important in relation to migration, diaspora, alienation, accommodation, displacement, and exile. There are different novels, and the genre is given through poetry and the other forms of the writings to make you understand these debates are still relevant, right? And you would have noticed the migration issue, diasporic issues through social media and other forms and in everyday life. So overall idea of this particular course is to make you understand there are these different frameworks, theoretical models, and the concept in which you can sort of engage with it and sort of learn more things from the gender perspective. I'm sure that you are going to go and read this particular course and enhance your understanding and the knowledge. Thank you very much.